Three. Hi, I'm Dave Warner. I'm an Australian crime author and I've done quite a few crime books, and I'm going to take you on a very quick history of them. Here's the first one, City of Light. This follows Detective Snowy Lane. He starts off as a young cop. This is set in 1979 to 89. It's kind of like LA Noire style, first person, Philip Marlowe, that kind of thing. Big complex crime story that goes over 10 years, set in Perth, Western Australia. That was my first effort in about 1995, and that won the West Australian Premier's Award for Literature that year. I followed that up with Big Bad Blood, which is set in Sydney in 1965. This is very much like an Australian kind of equivalent of a James Ellroy style. Very tough, punchy, short sentences. Follows two cops, Ray Shearer and John Gordon. This is one of my favourites, probably the most complex plot that I've written in all my books. Big Bad Blood, and it's probably the darkest and heaviest hitting of the books. I followed that up with, I always liked whodunits, and I love Agatha Christie and writers like that, but particular Agatha, the master. And so I followed up with an idea I had of a detective, a guitarist detective, Lizard Zirk. And so it's primarily whodunits. He's an amateur sleuth. He mixes in, hobnobs in the top circles of film and television, music and sport. And so Murder in the Groove was the first one of these. Murder in the Frame, which was about film, the first one about the record industry, and Murder in the Off-Season, about sport. They, though these were done 20 years ago, they've recently been redone through the Untapped collection and Booktopia in Australia, and it's great to see the Lizard back with his chauffeur Fleur. They're a bit lighter. You read these in a day or two. A little bit of fun, a little bit of potential romance in those ones. Another one of my favourites, Espresso, set in Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, and this is more a Carl Hiaasen or Elmore Leonard style book. Or story with Rick Bosky is the hero, and he's a small time crim, and he's always in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's not really a crim. He's a nice guy, but everything always goes wrong for Rick. And this follows his adventures as he tries to extricate himself from a loan shark. It's a real favourite of mine. People love it. You can get it through Amazon or on Amazon Kindle at the moment. I took a break then to do screenwriting for about 10 years. They were all written by early 2000s. And then I came back with this one, Before It Breaks. I wrote it in about 2013, came up with the idea in about 2006. And my hero in this is Detective Dan Clement, who works in the Kimberley region in Western Australia, which is a huge and vast outback region about the size of all Europe, and it's policed by just a handful of cops. And Dan Clement is one of those cops. And this book, Before It Breaks, won the Ned Kelly Award, which is by the Australian Crime Fiction Writers Association, and that was a real buzz for me to do that, especially after I hadn't picked up the pen to do a book for about 12 years, and Dan has since been back. It's set primarily, this one, in Broome, which is a little sort of oasis on the coast of northwestern Australia, and again, this is a relatively complex book that goes with that. It hovers between Broome and Frankfurt in 1979 and Broome in 2016. I followed that up with Clear to the Horizon, which has Dan. We've just talked about Dan. And remember Snowy Lane, going right back to the first. So I had always wanted to bring Snowy Lane back, and I just wanted the right story for it. And I'd been resisting doing a story after I did this book, City of Light, which had three girls go missing as a result of a serial killer in a suburb in Western Australia. Not long after that, a real serial killer struck. So much so that eventually the police came knocking on my door because I'd been named as a suspect in the case by a number of people. And as a result of that, I ended up writing Clear to the Horizon, which brings back Snowy and pairs him up with Dan Clement in Broome. And a very interesting and satisfying story. And actually, I tried to solve the real life case that was still ongoing at this time. It was Australia's biggest ever and longest running unsolved murder case. The Claremont serial killers kind of, based around this. And as it turned out, Snowy gets quite a few things right that the police eventually got right. Change of pace. This one, love this book, River of Salt. It starts in 1961 in Philadelphia, goes through to 1963 when a Philadelphia crim works as a hitman for the mafia. He tries to get out of that world and comes to live on the north coast of New South Wales, far from any action. But of course, you can never be far from any action. So it's set in and around the world of surf culture in the 1960s, small town Australia. It's a real favourite of mine, that. I hope somebody makes it into a TV series because it deserves it. This, Over My Dead Body, a real fun book with surprisingly an amount of depth. In early 2003, I had this idea of what if Sherlock Holmes, when he plunged off the Reichenbach Falls, what if he didn't die, but he landed in the freezing waters, or he died, but Dr. Watson froze his body and maintained it in the freezing waters, and we then brought him back in 2020. And this is what happens. Sherlock Holmes is brought back to life in 2020 in New York with Dr. Georgette Watson, the great-great-granddaughter of John Watson. It sounds science fiction-y, which in a way it is, but once you buy that premise, it's actually very real, and I got a lot of satisfaction out of dealing with how Sherlock would cope with the present-day situation. And lastly, After the Flood, back to Dan Clement. This was the most recent one of mine. It's been very well received. Back in Broome, and there's plenty going on with Dan in this one. I'm not going to go through it all. There's plenty more stuff. I don't want to bore you. The next book that I have coming out in October is going all the way back to these guys from 1965. It's 1967. It's called Summer of Blood, and it's set in California, where they're going to be trying to track a serial killer down in California as they search for a young Australian guy who's gone missing. That's the Warner Collection.